What a treat to be here with you tonight. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So Sam has billed me with a lot to live up to, so I hope I meet those expectations. And my sweetheart is sitting right down front with my phone, making me very nervous. So I appreciate your indulgence. I love that Sam talked about how stories are how we convey our histories and our values. And those things, I think, are really important, and why I tell really old stories from other places. And tonight I'd like to share a couple of those with you. The first story is from North Africa, and it goes a little like this. Can you hear me over the drum? Not if you do. I can't hear you. Oh, okay, thank you. So, like all stories, it starts out this way. Once upon a time. Do you remember the time? Yeah, once upon a time, back in old North Africa, they told this story about the origins of the soul. And in those old stories, they said that there were two different worlds. There was this world, the world we call the real world, the world where we assess and measure things and try to understand it all. And then there's this other world, the spirit world, they call it, and that's the world where all the souls live, hanging out, watching what's going on over here. And over there in the spirit world, those souls live like birds flitting around the branches of a great, great tree, checking out what's happening over here in the real world, we call it. And just every once in a while, something will catch their attention and inspire them to take a closer look. And so that soul flitting from branch to branch will edge on out to the end and take a closer look. And maybe, just maybe, they're inspired enough to come over here and see it all in person. And so the soul takes flight and leaves the spirit world and heads over here to our world, the real world. And at the moment that it does, there suddenly appears along beside it this magical, mystical, divine twin. And they fly along together and they talk about what it is that has inspired that soul to come here to our world, to the real world. And so they chat along the way and they get here and they start looking around. They're checking things out. And one of the first things they see is a great big tree. Kind of like that tree right outside there. That one right across the street. You know the one I'm talking about? And so they know trees and they like trees, and that's where they go. And so they land in the tree, and at that moment, it becomes the tree of forgetfulness. And that soul flying like a bird all this way with its divine twin forgets why it came here in the first place. And then it's born. And so that newly minted soul, that newborn right here in this world, our world, the real world, came all the way from that other world, the spirit world, forgot why it came here, pops out into the open with no recollection of why it came here in the first place. And so as it grows here in this world, it becomes its purpose, its mission in life to uncover, to discover, to recover what it was that inspired it to come here in the first place. And I say, we're not so very different from that. Thank you. Thank you. So our story from Africa takes us a little further north. And this story comes from Asia, and it's an old village story. And it's a story that I like a lot because it talks about agriculture. And I grew up not far from here, if you read the little playbill, in White Cross, North Carolina, if you know where that is. There's not much there except a crossroads, really. And my friends and neighbors as a child were cornfields and dairy cattle. And so this is a tribute to my old friends. So in this story, there was a young man. And as he was coming of age, he does what all young men try to do. At this point, he's moved beyond that little lost soul, gotten a little handle on the things that might interest him, but he still doesn't quite know what it is that he's supposed to be doing in the world. And so he sets out to discover what it is that he's supposed to do with his life. And he knows that he has no real grasp of that thing. And so he goes to someone older and wiser. He looks for his grandmother. And he says, Grandma, how is it that I figure out what it is that I'm supposed to be doing here in the world? And she says, well, there's two ways to get there. The first way is the way of nature. To take a walk into the wilderness. And maybe there you'll brush against the branches of the tree of life and discover what it is that lights your fire. And the other way is the way of culture. Nature or culture, there's only two. And in the way of culture, you move through the cities and the streets and brush up against the people. And just maybe something there will inspire you and help you discover what it is that you're supposed to be doing with your life. And so he liked this idea. There was only two to choose from: up, down, left, right, higher and lower. Limited options. Easy research. And so he set out to find his way in the world. And he walked into the city and looked around the markets and hung out where they sold things and made things and where the people milled about. But he didn't find it there. So he looked a little closer, and he went into the churches and the mosques and the synagogues because he knew that people sometimes found purpose in those places. But that wasn't for him. And he found no purpose there either. So he gave up on the culture option and decided he was going to go look in nature instead. And so he walked out into the woods. And he crossed the fields and the streams and walked through the forest. And he walked and he walked and he walked, and still he couldn't find his purpose in the world. And so eventually he ran out of motivation. Really, he ran out of snacks. And so he went home to Grandma and said, Grandma, I haven't figured it out. What should I do? And so Grandma says to him, he says, was there anywhere along the way that you might have encountered someone that you thought might be a teacher? Someone who could be a mentor for you, who might inspire you and help you discover what you're supposed to be doing in the world? He said, well, there's this one time, way out in the woods, I stumbled upon this clearing. And there was a fellow in a white robe, and he was surrounded by disciples sitting in a circle, and he was teaching them. And he seemed to have some grasp of what was going on in the world and how to help people find their way. And he might be the teacher that I came across. And she said, well, you should go to him and spend some time there. Don't worry that you come from humble beginnings. Don't worry that you have no money. Just ask. And the teacher will show up. And so he went. And he went back into the forest and he found that clearing full of people studying with the disciples was his goal. And so he found the teacher, the fellow in his white robe sitting up at the front, and he says, hey, I'm here to learn from you, but I have no money, I have no contribution, but I feel like I can find some purpose here, and will you help me? And so the teacher invited him to join. And they gave him clothes to wear and food to eat, and his own little hut to sleep in. And every day, the students would gather. And they would sit with the teacher in the morning. And they'd get a new lesson. And they'd ponder it in the afternoon. And so one day, he's there. And the lesson is this. The teacher asks his students this very important question. He says, what is the one thing in life that you love more than anything else? The thing that you love greatest. And he let them think about it. And then they decided to share. And so they went all around the circle, and all the disciples shared the things that they loved. And some had grand ideas about peace and justice and love, and some who had browner noses than others. They said the teacher was the thing that they loved more than anything else. And they went through the whole group, and they covered everyone except for that young man finding his way in the world. So the teacher asked him, what is it that you love more than anything else? He says, well, teacher, I'm embarrassed to say, because it's a simple thing and it's a humble thing, but I think I might be ashamed to share it with you and with the others. And so the teacher asked him again, because it was the thing that he loved, and therefore it was important to at least one person there. And so he answered, and he said, teacher, the thing that I love more than anything else in the world is my cow. Yeah. And so he began to explain. He said, my cow and my little farm is the thing that I love most. I love its big brown eyes that look at me lovingly, and I love its great broad horns. And I love the way that its strong chest parts the grasses when I ride it through the fields. And I love the sounds of its hooves on the cobblestones in the courtyard. And I love its soft fur and its broad back. And I love the sweet milk that comes from its teats that hydrates me and nourishes me. Yes, more than anything else in the world, I love that cow. And so the teacher sent all the disciples out to their huts to meditate and to dwell on the things that they loved most in the world. And when it came time for everyone to reconvene, everyone came back to the circle, except for that young man finding his way in the world. And so the teacher sent them out to look for him. And they went to his hut and they knocked on the door, and no one came. And so one student walked up on the porch and pushed open the screen. And there he sat, quietly, in the middle of his hut, just sitting there. And so they called him out, and he wouldn't come, he wouldn't answer. And so the other disciples thought something must be wrong. And so they went and got the teacher. The teacher came up and walked inside and said, "What's wrong with you? Our time is up. It's time to come back to the group and share, and you've been at this much longer than anyone else. Come outside and tell us what you've discovered." And the young man said, "Teacher, I would love to join you in the circle again, but I can't. You see, my horns won't fit through the door." And the teacher turned and called the other disciples together. He says, "Today, this young one is our teacher. Today, he's the wisest among us, because he's found a way to love something so deeply and so fully, however simple and humble it may be, that he's actually become that thing in his own mind." And I say, there's no better way to be in the world. Would you agree? Thank you. Thank you. Can I share one more? Awesome. Thank you. So this story is another story that I like a lot. Another old story. The beggar and the Buddha. Do you guys know that story? It's a really good story. It goes like this. So once upon a time, there was this beggar. And he does what beggars do. He sits there on the street with his bowl and hopes that someone will throw him some crumbs once in a while. And he's sitting there doing his beggar thing, getting ignored the way most beggars do, when suddenly a rat appears and steals the crumbs from his bowl. And he's really cheesed off. He has nothing, and yet the rat chooses to steal from him. And he says, "Hey, Mr. Rat," because back then you talk to the creatures, you know. "Why, with all of this bounty around you, would you choose to come and steal from me, just a humble beggar?" And the rat says, "Well, I don't know. Why don't you go ask someone smarter than me? Go ask the Buddha." And the beggar thought for a minute, and he said, "Well, I'm really not doing anything else, so I might as well. It'd be a good day for a journey." And so he gathers up his bowl and sets off, begging along the way, in hopes of finding the answer to his question. And so he travels for a day, and at the end of his day, he encounters a little home on the side of the road. And he knocks on the door and asks for some shelter. People used to do that too, you know. Think about that fellow in the manger, right? And so the father answers the door and invites the beggar in for a little something to eat and introduces him to his wife and his daughter. And the beggar explains a bit about where he's going, how he's got this question for the Buddha, and he's set out on this pilgrimage to find him. And the father says, "Well, hey, I've got a question too. Maybe you could answer this question of the Buddha for me." He says, "See, I have this lovely daughter, but she doesn't speak, and no one understands why. So would you ask the Buddha how we solve this problem?" And the beggar agrees. And the next morning he sets out along his way. And so at the end of the second day, he comes across this great range of mountains. And he climbs up the first one and realizes that there's no way across. But he looks over and he sees standing there on the mountaintop beside him a wizard with a staff, looking out over the horizon. And the wizard says to him, "What are you doing up here? No one comes up here." And the beggar tells him that he's on this pilgrimage. He's got a question. He's going to ask the Buddha. "But I can't get across the mountain," he says. And the wizard says, "Well, hey, I can help you with that, but I just happen to have a question too. You see, I've been trying to get into heaven for 500 years. And I've done everything that I'm supposed to do, but I just can't get there. Would you ask for me, the Buddha, why I can't get into heaven and what I'm supposed to do?" And the beggar says, "Sure, I can take your question to the Buddha. Maybe you can help me across the mountain." And the wizard says, "Sure," and he takes up his staff and he takes the hand of the beggar and he flies him all the way across the mountain range and tells him, "Hey, I'll be over here on this side when you're ready to come back, and I'll be looking forward to hearing that answer." And so the beggar thanks him and keeps on going. And at the end of the next day, he comes to a great river, wide and fast, and there's just no way across. And he doesn't know what to do. So he walks along the side of the river. And he comes across a giant turtle. And he sits down beside the turtle. And the turtle says, because you know, old stories, the animals talk to you too. And the turtle says, "Hey, what are you doing out here?" And the bear tells him, I'm on my way to find the Buddha. I've got a question for him. And I need to cross the river, but there doesn't seem to be any way across. And the turtle says, "Well, hey, I can probably help you cross the river. But, you know, I happen to have a question too. You see, for 1,000 years, I've been trying to turn into a dragon. And I've done everything that I'm supposed to do, but it just isn't working. And so maybe you could ask the Buddha for me how it is that I'm supposed to become this awesome dragon." And the beggar says, sure, I can ask that question for you, and maybe, just maybe, you can help me across the river. And the turtle puts him on his back and swims him across. And the beggar keeps on his way with a word of thanks and a wave. And eventually he gets to the village where the Buddha lives. But there's a long line waiting to see the Buddha. People are lined up and waiting. They've come from far and wide. He's not the only pilgrim there. But he hops in the line and waits for his turn. And as he gets closer, the gatekeepers say, you'll soon have your audience with the Buddha. And you're allowed to ask him 3 questions. And he says, oh no, I've got 4. There's my question about how it is that I don't become stay a beggar. And there's the father's question about why the daughter can't speak. And there's the wizard's question about how he ascends into heaven. And there's the turtle's question about how he becomes a dragon, and I don't know what to do. And then it's his turn. And so as he's walking into the presence of the Buddha, he considers it, and he says, well, I'm just a humble beggar, and my problem really isn't so big, so I'll just ask the questions of these other folks and carry their answers back to them. And so he asks the Buddha, and the Buddha gives him the answers and sends him on his way. And so he starts the journey home. And so he comes back to the river, and he finds the turtle. And the turtle says, oh, welcome back. Did you get an answer to my question? And the beggar says to the turtle, yes, I did. And the Buddha says that the reason you can't become a dragon is because you won't come out of your shell. He says this place of safekeeping is keeping you from growing into the thing that you could be. And so the turtle takes off his shell, and sure enough, he turns into a dragon and flies away with a word of thanks and a flick of his tail. And the Buddha's questions and answers carry on down the road with the beggar. And so the beggar walks and walks, and he comes to the mountain range, and there awaits the wizard. And the wizard says, hey, I'm so glad you made it back. Did you come up with an answer to this question? Why is it that I can't become ascended into heaven? And the beggar says to him, well, the Buddha says, the reason that you can't ascend into heaven is because you won't relinquish your power. Your staff is like an anchor. And once you're willing to put it down, then perhaps you'll get where you want to be. And so the wizard, he hands the staff to the beggar. And sure enough, he starts to float away and ascend into heaven. And so the beggar continues on his way, and now he's got a staff and a turtle shell. And he's on his way back home. And he comes to the home of the father with the daughter who can't speak. And he knocks on the door and says, hey, I've come back and I have your answer for you. And the father says, wonderful, what does the Buddha say about why my daughter can't speak? And the beggar says to him, she doesn't speak because she hasn't found anyone worthy of speaking to. And so as he's saying this, she walks down the stairs and says, hello, aren't you that beggar that was here a few days ago? And so the moral of the story is this: we'll never grow if we keep to the safe places. And we'll never become greater than ourselves if we won't relinquish the power and give it to another. And only when we encounter someone worthy, someone willing to do what it takes, someone to give of themselves so that others may flourish, should we ever speak a word. old stories, just by virtue of their longevity, I think they're worth sharing. And I thank you for your listening. It's a gift.